What's always interesting to me is that centrist Democrats never own the fact that they are, in fact, centrist, with the exception of Hillary Clinton.
I get accused of being kind of moderate and center. I plead guilty.
But individuals like Joe Biden, for example, they are very much centrist, conservative Democrats. I mean, Joe Biden is an individual who voted for the Iraq War. He voted for the crime bill in 1994. He voted for right-wing welfare reform that Bill Clinton signed into law, but at the same time, he still maintains that he is a progressive. And when he decided to recently come out and stump for Andrew Cuomo in New York's current gubernatorial primary, he decided to make the case for his own progressivism and tried to sell Andrew Cuomo as being a progressive as well. Now, of course, the reason why he's doing this is because Andrew Cuomo is being challenged by Cynthia Nixon from the left, who's a true progressive. So he knows that if he wants to make himself and individuals like Andrew Cuomo, who are actually very conservative Democrats, appealing to their own base, then they have to sell themselves as progressives.
In the 36 years that I sat in the United States Senate, I was rated, depending on these ratings agencies, between the 4th and the 7th most liberal member of the United States Senate. So I take a backseat to no one on my progressive values. No one. Zero. No one. I got involved in politics because of civil rights. Stayed involved in politics because of women's rights. I've been involved in politics because of the abuse of power internationally. So I take a backseat to no one. And by the way, Andrew Cuomo has never backed away from his progressive principles, not one single time.
That's a joke. Now, the question ultimately, I think, is why do centrist Democrats like Joe Biden not just own the fact that they are centrists? Why risk coming off as disingenuous, which they do, and gaslighting voters into thinking that they're progressive when we all know that they're not progressive? Well, it's because this is a political calculation. Joe Biden knows that the Democratic Party's left-wing base, by and large, is very progressive when you look at policy issues, public polling specifically. Now, the reason why at face value, someone like Andrew Cuomo might be misinterpreted as someone who is a progressive is because he comes out in favor of pretty bold progressive policies, but at the same time, behind the scenes, he's doing things to make sure that those bold progressive policies he purports to support never pass, never see the light of day. On paper, New York is a solidly blue state. Over 60% of voters chose Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama in the past 3 presidential elections, and the lower house of the state legislature has a solid Democratic majority. But a corrupt system of bipartisan collusion ensures Republican control of the upper chamber, and Cuomo encourages and benefits from this manufactured partisan split. It's an open secret in Albany that Cuomo is committed to maintaining Republican control of the state Senate, where creative redistricting deliberately gives the upstate GOP minority an advantage. The governor could have used his veto power over redistricting maps in 2012 or used some of his vast campaign resources to elect a stronger Democratic majority in the upper chamber. Instead, he has carefully maintained this structural barrier to the passage of progressive bills. But gerrymandering alone isn't enough to give the Republicans effective power over Albany's agenda. For that, we can thank the Independent Democratic Conference, a group of 8 Democratic senators who broke away from the Democratic caucus to forge a power-sharing agreement with Republicans. In 2012, after Democrats claimed a slim majority in the upper house, 4 of those Democrats, Jeffrey Klein, Dianne Savino, David Valesky, and David Carlucci, agreed to caucus with the Republicans, giving the GOP the majority. Since then, the IDC has doubled in size and remained loyal to the Republicans. This arrangement benefits all the key political players, above all, Cuomo and his presidential ambitions. Senate Republicans can control redistricting and enjoy the perks and resources of majority status, including the ability to control New York State's over $150 billion budget. IDC members get pork for their districts, stipends for chairing committees, bigger budgets, expanded staff, and access to big centrist Democratic donors such as charter schools, real estate interests, and hedge funds. Cuomo continues to cut spending and prevent tax increases, particularly on high income and property taxes, to appease donors, and casts himself as a moderate progressive who gets things done. Meanwhile, Democrats in the Assembly and Senate can take strong left liberal positions on a number of social democratic bills like single payer, knowing full well that the Senate Majority Leader will never allow it to leave the committee for a floor vote. Now, that is why Andrew Cuomo is not a progressive at all. And that's incredibly shady. It shows that he is not there because he cares about the people. He's in power for self-serving reasons. It's to bolster his own career. It's because he has ambitions, bigger ambitions, perhaps to run in 2020. But we know that if he were to ever be elected president, hopefully that never happens, he would do everything in his power to make sure that Republicans hang on to control of at least the Senate or House so he can take really bold progressive policy stances and never have to worry about signing them into law, because he's not in favor of them, because he takes money from all of these special interests that aren't in favor of these policies, so he wouldn't want to violate what they want. So instead, he walks this really fine line in coming out in favor of these policies to appease the base, but making sure that those policies never get codified into law. It's so despicable. Now, if you tune into Secular Talk, he actually lives in New York, and Kyle talks about how there was a corruption panel that Andrew Cuomo was in favor of, but actually decided to abolish once they started to look into his own corruption. This is not just a conservative Democrat. This is a very corrupt Democrat. But it's very telling that members of the Democratic Party establishment like Joe Biden and Tom Perez are jumping over themselves to endorse Andrew Cuomo when the optics of this show that the Democratic Party, they're really not committed to progressive policies if they can support someone like Andrew Cuomo over someone like Cynthia Nixon, who is clearly a true progressive. But getting back to the original question that was posed, which is why, these centrist Democrats have to market themselves as progressives, it's because they know that that's the only way they can win. It's bullshit, though. Everyone knows that they're not progressives. Joe Biden is not a progressive. He touts his voting record, and I also see this come up with Hillary Clinton, how if you compare Hillary Clinton's voting record to Bernie Sanders' voting record, well, above 90% of the time, they vote the same way. But you're not looking at that 10% of the time. I think it's a gross oversimplification, because policies have different levels of salience. That varies. So something could be not too important, and something could be really important that Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden took the wrong side of. For example, the Iraq War, the crime bill. Hillary Clinton didn't vote for that, but certainly she lobbied for it as First Lady. Heavily so. So, Democrats, they try to pretend that they're progressive and they tout their voting record, but when you really dive into the details, you can see these are not progressives. These are opportunists who will say whatever they need to get elected. And that's what Joe Biden is. That's what Andrew Cuomo is. And if you truly know about politics, you wouldn't fall for it. You'd go for the progressive. And that is Cynthia Nixon in this case.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.